September 19th, 1940. Warsaw's streets echo with the crunch of Nazi boots on cobblestone. It's a crisp fall morning, but the air reeks of fear. Smoke from bombed-out buildings mixing with the sweat of rounded-up civilians. Witold Pilecki, a 39-year-old Polish cavalry officer, stands deliberately in the wrong place at the wrong time. He's not running, he's not hiding. No, this guy's walking straight into a łapanka, a brutal street sweep where the Gestapo hauls off hundreds for interrogation or worse. Shouts in German pierce the chaos. Schnell! Move! Trucks rumble, engines growling like predators. Pilecki feels the rough shove of a rifle butt against his back as he's herded with 2,000 others onto cattle cars bound for a place whispered about in nightmares. Auschwitz. His heart pounds, but his eyes are steady. This isn't bad luck. It's his plan. Yeah, you heard that right. The only man in history to volunteer for the deadliest concentration camp on Earth. Pilecki's no ordinary soldier. He's a larger-than-life resistance fighter, co-founder of the secret Polish army, a guy who's already dodged death in the 1939 invasion. But here's the paradox. He's trading freedom for chains to spy from the inside, to document the unspeakable and build a rebellion under the Nazis' noses. Think Ocean's 11 meets Schindler's List, but real and way grittier. He's got a fake ID as Tomasz Serafiński, a calculated risk to infiltrate hell and expose it. The train jolts forward, crammed bodies pressing in, the metallic tang of rust and despair filling his lungs. As the doors slam shut, sealing him in darkness, Pilecki knows he's stepping into a machine of mass murder. Gas chambers, crematoria, experiments that turn humans into ghosts. Over the next 947 days, he'll witness horrors that shatter the soul. Starving inmates, piles of bodies, the acrid smoke of burning flesh choking the sky. This isn't just a wild tale of survival. It's proof that one act of insane courage can defy an empire of evil. But how does a family man, a father of two, choose to walk into the jaws of death? What drives someone to face unimaginable horrors when the world outside is already crumbling? To grasp how this legend pulled it off, we've got to rewind to where it all started. His unbreakable spirit forged in the fires of war. Born in 1901 in the remote Russian town of Olonets, Witold Pilecki grew up in a world of upheaval. His family, Polish patriots, had been exiled to the frozen north by the Tsar for fighting in the 1863 uprising against Russian rule. Young Witold learned early that freedom wasn't free. His grandfather had paid with 7 years in Siberia. By age 12, the family snuck back to Vilnius, in what was then Russian-occupied Poland. There, Witold dove into the Boy Scouts, honing skills in survival, leadership, and secret codes that would later save lives. Fast forward to 1918, Poland's fighting for independence after World War I. At just 17, Pilecki grabs a rifle and joins the underground resistance against the Germans, then the Soviets. In the Polish-Soviet War of 1919 to 1921, he's a cavalry scout, charging into battles on horseback, dodging bullets and bayonets. He earns the Cross of Valor, twice for cool-headed bravery under fire. Think of him as a real-life Indiana Jones, but with a saber instead of a whip. One anecdote. During a raid, he single-handedly captured a Bolshevik outpost, using wits over weapons. A soldier must think like the enemy, he'd later say, a mantra that defined him. But Pilecki wasn't all heroics. He had flaws, like a stubborn idealism that blinded him to personal risks. Married in 1931 to Maria, a schoolteacher, he became a devoted dad to Andre and Zofia. He ran a family farm, painted watercolors, and even wrote poetry. Yet that peaceful life clashed with his warrior soul. War had wired him for action. Peacetime felt like waiting for the next storm. His motivation? Unyielding patriotism, as he put it in his writings. I cannot live while Poland is enslaved. This drive turned a gentleman farmer into a co-founder of the Tajna Armia Polska, the secret Polish army, in November 1939, right after the Nazis and Soviets carved up his homeland. From scouting Bolshevik lines to organizing underground cells, Pilecki's early grit forged an unbreakable resolve. It's the classic underdog story. Rags of oppression to the riches of resilience. His path shows how adversity sharpens skills you didn't know you needed. turning survival instincts into tools for defiance. But then, everything changed. Whispers reached the resistance about a new Nazi camp in Auschwitz, swallowing Poles whole. Armed with his battle-hardened background, Pilecki hatched a plan no one else dared: volunteer to go inside. Little did he know, that decision would plunge him into the abyss. Drawing on those war-honed instincts from his early battles and underground work, Pilecki didn't just stumble into Auschwitz, he engineered it. It all kicked off in the summer of 1940, right after the Nazis turned a former Polish army barracks in Auschwitz into something far worse. Whispers filtered back to the resistance in Warsaw. Political prisoners vanishing, rumors of a labor camp swallowing hundreds. The Polish government in exile in London needed hard intel. No escapes reported, no survivors spilling details. Someone had to go in. At a secret meeting in a dingy Warsaw apartment on August 1940, Pilecki stepped up. "I'll volunteer," he said, calm as ever. His superiors balked. Who walks into a death trap? But Pilecki argued it was the only way. Infiltrate, document, organize resistance from within, then bust out with proof. Think of it as a high-stakes undercover op, like a WWII version of Donnie Brasco, but with zero backup. He prepped meticulously. First, he ditched his real identity. Using resistance contacts, he snagged papers for Tomasz Serafiński, a fictional everyman. No fancy gadgets, just a cyanide pill sewn into his clothes as a last resort, in case torture cracked him. Tactics were all about blending in. Pilecki mapped out Nazi roundup patterns, those infamous Łapanki where SS trucks swooped in, grabbing civilians off streets. He timed it for September 19, 1940, positioning himself at a hotspot near Warsaw's Żoliborz district. No heroics. He let them cuff him with 1,823 others that day. En route, he ditched any incriminating items, memorizing codes for future messages. Arrival at Auschwitz? Brutal. Stripped naked in the pouring rain, shaved bald, tattooed with number 4859. Guards beat them senseless. Pilecki took a rifle butt to the jaw, losing teeth but stayed sharp. Survive the first week, he told himself, drawing on scout training to spot allies. Early wins came quick, proving his prep paid off. Within days, he linked up with fellow Poles, whispering in the shadows during roll calls. By October 1940, he'd recruited his first cell, 4 trusted inmates, including a pre-war friend, Władysław Bartoszewski. They formed the Związek Organizacji Wojskowej, the union of military organizations, starting small. Clever moves? They used work details to smuggle food, meds from sympathetic guards bribed with smuggled cigarettes. Pilecki posed as a labor organizer, mapping the camp's layout. Barracks for 700 crammed with thousands, the infamous Block 11 for torture. He documented everything mentally: executions by firing squad, the first gassings tested on Soviet POWs in September 1941. Momentum built. By mid-1941, his network hit 500 members across blocks, divided into cells of 5 to avoid total collapse if one got busted. They sabotaged subtly, slowing factory output for IG Farben, the chemical giant using slave labor. First big success, smuggling reports out via released prisoners. In November 1940, a freed inmate carried Pilecki's initial dispatch to Warsaw. Details on inmate numbers, up to 10,000. Death rates, hundreds daily from typhus. Beatings. It reached London by early 1941, giving the Allies their first glimpse. These wins felt electric, like stacking chips in a poker game against the house. But minor cracks showed. Guards sniffed around suspicious groups. One close call in December 1940, when a search nearly uncovered hidden notes. Foreshadowing the nightmare? Pilecki heard screams from the medical block. Dr. Joseph Mengele hadn't arrived yet, but experiments on inmates were ramping up. Locals outside whispered about the smoke from chimneys, but inside, starvation gnawed at resolve. Still, these early victories proved preparation beats luck every time. Pilecki's strategic edge turned a suicide mission into a foothold. These triumphs felt unstoppable, a testament to resourcefulness in the face of hell. Until the horrors escalated, testing every ounce of that grit in ways he never imagined. That careful planning from the setup paid off in spades. but the heat was just turning up. By summer 1941, Auschwitz wasn't just a brutal prison anymore. It morphed into a full-blown extermination factory. The first major conflict slammed Pilecki like a freight train, the arrival of mass Jewish transports. What started as rumors became nightmare reality. On July 28, 1941, the first train rolled in from occupied territories. 1,000 men, women, and kids, stripped of everything, herded like cattle. Pilecki watched from his work detail, heart pounding, as SS doctors like Fritz Klein barked orders for selections. Left for labor, right for death. The air thickened with dread, the metallic screech of train brakes echoing over sobs. Step by step, the horror unfolded. Pilecki's network kicked into overdrive. They needed intel on this shift, fast. He assigned scouts, one guy in the Sonderkommando, the forced labor crew handling bodies, reported back whispers of special treatment. Then September 3, 1941, the first test gassing, 850 Soviet POWs and 250 sick Poles crammed into Block 11's basement. Guards in gas masks tossed Zyklon B pellets through vents. Pilecki, hiding in shadows during a night shift, heard it all. The choking gasps, the pounding on walls, silence falling like a hammer after 20 minutes. The next day, acrid smoke billowed from makeshift crematoria, stinging eyes and throats for miles. "It burns like fire," an inmate muttered to him, coughing up black phlegm. Close call number 1. During a random roll call, a capo, those inmate overseers turned vicious by the Nazis, eyed Pilecki's group suspiciously. "You, 4,859, step forward," rifle raised. Pilecki froze, mind racing. He faked a collapse, clutching his chest like a heart attack. Allies dragged him to the infirmary, buying time. Adapt or die, that was the game. He adapted like a pro. Drawing on his cavalry days, Pilecki reorganized the ZOW into tighter cells. They stole tools, wire cutters from the workshops, hidden in bread loaves, bribed a guard with gold teeth pulled from corpses. By late 1941, they saved dozens, swapping ID numbers to pull friends from death lists, smuggling antibiotics to fight typhus outbreaks that killed 15,000 that winter. One gutsy move? A step-by-step sabotage on the Buna synthetic rubber plant. Infiltrate the crew. Check. Loosen machine bolts. Check. Watch production grind to a halt, delaying Nazi war efforts by weeks. But violence ramped up. In March 1942, a botched escape by outsiders triggered a camp-wide lockdown. Hundreds executed in reprisal, bodies piled like firewood. Pilecki's cell barely dodged a raid. They burned notes in a stove seconds before boots kicked in the door. Glass shattered from nearby barracks as guards unleashed dogs, tearing into runners. Blood soaked the snow, screams piercing the night. The wind came in April 1942. Pilecki smuggled out his most damning report yet via a released prisoner named Stefan Pilecki. Pages of coded details on gassings, death tolls hitting 1,000 daily, blueprints of the expanding Birkenau section with its 4 massive crematoria under construction. It reached Warsaw, then London. Victory tasted sweet, but it jacked the stakes sky high. Nazis amped up hunts for agitators, installing more informers. Pilecki knew, one slip and the whole network crumbles. This chaos hammered home a key lesson. Adaptability saves the day, turning curveballs into comebacks. It's what separates survivors from statistics. These hard-fought gains cracked open doors to even bigger risks and the betrayals lurking in the shadows. Fresh off that hard-won report smuggling in April 1942, things got messier fast. New enemies emerging from every shadow. The camp was exploding in size. Birkenau, the massive extension, opened that spring, ramping up the killing machine to industrial levels. By July 1942, daily transports dumped 5,000 Jews from across Europe. Dutch, French, Slovak, straight into selections. Pilecki's network, now swollen to over 1,000 members, evolved from quiet sabotage to bolder plays. They adopted disguises, fake work badges to slip between sections, hidden radios pieced from scavenged parts for coded broadcasts. Tech wasn't high-end, no VPNs back then, But they used what they had, like typhus-infected lice released into SS uniforms for petty revenge. It worked. Guards dropped like flies during outbreaks. But here's the first big twist. Betrayals started cracking the foundation. In August 1942, a capo named Otto Kusel, once an ally, flipped under torture, ratting out a Zau cell. Nazis rounded up 50 inmates, including key recruiters. Executions in the gravel pit. Lined up, shot in the neck, bodies bulldozed into mass graves. Pilecki dodged it by a hair, hiding in a coal bunker for 48 hours. Heart racing as boots stomped overhead. Paranoia set in hard. "Who can you trust when hunger turns brothers into snitches?" he'd whisper to his inner circle. Success had bred hubris. They'd grown too fast, masks slipping in moments of false security. One guy bragged during a dice game. Next day, he vanished into Block 11's torture cells. Sequence of chaos piled on. Fall 1942. Authority crackdowns intensified with Rudolf Höss, the commandant, installing electric fences and watchtowers. Pilecki pushed for an uprising. Plan was to overpower guards during a shift change, seize weapons from the armory, signal external resistance for airdrops. They recruited copycats from other groups, like Jewish Sonderkommando crews, layering in alliances. But mid-planning, another twist. A smuggled report in October 1942 detailed Birkenau's 4 crematoria, capacity for 4,400 bodies daily. It hit Warsaw, then the Allies in London and Washington. U.S. government got wind through Polish exiles. Think global angles with American OSS spies reviewing it. But the shocker? Dismissal. Exaggerated, they called it. Impossible. Hubris blinded the world leaders. They couldn't fathom the scale. Pilecki learned via back channels, his proof ignored, fueling isolation. "I'm freer in here fighting than they are out there denying," he might have thought, rifle metaphorically in hand. Rising risks hit peak. December 1942. A failed escape by 3 Zau members triggered reprisals. 200 Poles gassed in retaliation. Pilecki adapted again, tightening codes, but the toll mounted. Starvation rations dropped to 300 calories a day. Typhus claimed allies. Internal killings emerged, suspected informers quietly handled to protect the group. Heroes or villains? Moral gray areas blurred. Survival demanded ruthless choices. These twists hammered a reflective lesson. Hubris blinds even the sharpest minds. Stay grounded or watch empires crumble. Bigger heists loomed, like the uprising plot. But with external support ghosting them, it was building to an inevitable showdown. One that would force Pilecki's hand in the most daring way yet. All those complications from the betrayals and ignored reports exploded in the ultimate face-off. Pilecki's do-or-die escape from Auschwitz. By early 1943, the camp had become a sprawling death factory. Over 1.3 million people crammed in, with Birkenau's crematoria belching smoke 24/7. The uprising plan? Dead in the water. Allies weren't bombing the rails or sending aid. Radio pleas vanished into ether. Pilecki knew staying meant certain death. Typhus, selections, or a capo's whim. "If I don't get out now, the truth dies with me," he confided to his closest allies. Time to bail. The peak hit on Easter weekend, April 26, 1943. Pilecki, now skeletal at 130 pounds from 2.5 years of hell, picked his moment. He'd evolved the plan. No grand revolt, just a tight trio. Him, Jan Redze, and Edward Sisielski. They pulled bakery duty, the one shift with access to the outer perimeter. Tension cranked up as they baked loaves under guard eyes. At 6 p.m., as the SS overseer turned his back, Pilecki nodded. Time froze. Redze slammed a loaf pan into the guard's skull. Crack, down he went. They stripped his uniform, gagged him, locked the door. Hearts hammering, they slipped into disguises. Pilecki in the stolen SS jacket, fake keys jangling. Close call 1. A patrol dog snarled feet away. They froze in shadows, sweat mixing with flour dust. Out the bakery window, barbed wire loomed, electric fences humming like angry bees. They cut through with stolen pliers, sparks flying. Alarms blared seconds later, wailing sirens piercing the night, searchlights sweeping like predatory eyes. Gunfire erupted. Bullets whizzed past, splintering wood. "Run!" Pilecki hissed. They bolted into the woods, legs burning from starvation, weak muscles. Pursuit was relentless. SS trucks roared, dogs baying, flashlight beams slicing the darkness. One failure stung. Redzai twisted an ankle crossing a ravine, slowing them. Partial win. Pilecki's scout training kicked in. He led them through swamps, wading chest deep in icy muck to throw off scents. For 100 kilometers over 3 nights, they evaded, hiding in haystacks, begging scraps from farmers risking their lives. But the showdown wasn't over. On April 29th, they hit the Sola River, swollen, raging. No bridge, swim or die. Currents yanked them under, lungs screaming for air. Ciesielski nearly drowned, but Pilecki hauled him ashore. Exhausted, they staggered to a safe house in Alwernia. Victory? They made it out alive. The first successful escape with comprehensive intel. But the net tightened. Nazis plastered wanted posters, offering rewards. Pilecki shaved his head, changed names again, but paranoia lingered. Was that farmer a collaborator? Guards find escapees hanging in trees, suicide or setup. Conspiracy theories swirled in resistance circles. Maybe the Allies ignored reports on purpose, tied to politics. This peek revealed the raw cost of defiance, bodies broken, souls scarred, but truth clawed out. It's a gut punch on perseverance. Push through hell, and you might just redefine heroism. When the dust settled, though, the real consequences crashed in, delivering that bombshell report to a world that wasn't ready to listen. After that brutal escape showdown, the real fallout crashed down hard. Pilecki, battered but unbroken, linked up with the Home Army in Warsaw by May 1943. He compiled his masterpiece, Rapport Witolda, over 100 pages detailing Auschwitz's horrors. Stats painted the nightmare: 1.1 million murdered by war's end, 90% Jews, daily gassings of 2,000 in Birkenau's chambers, experiments on twins, sterilizations. He smuggled it to the Polish government in exile in London, then to allies in Washington. Reflections hit deep. "I've seen the devil's work," he wrote, vowing to fight on. But denial stung. The world shrugged. US and British officials labeled it exaggerated Polish propaganda. No bombings of the camps, no rescues. Loose ends? His network inside collapsed without him. Many allies executed, like 200 in reprisals after his breakout. Supporters in the resistance cried foul at the Allies' inaction. Authorities dismissed it as wartime fog. Pilecki didn't quit. He fought in the Warsaw Uprising, August 1944, leading charges against tanks, dodging snipers in rubble-strewn streets. Captured briefly, he escaped again, but fate twisted dark. Post-war, Soviet-backed communists took Poland. Arrested in May 1947 on trumped-up spying charges, he endured torture, electric shocks, nails pulled. In a show trial, March 1948, he denied nothing. "I tried to live honorably." Sentenced to death, executed by pistol on May 25, 1948, at 46. His body dumped in an unmarked grave. Family told lies for decades. The network shattered. Thousands of resistance fighters purged in Stalinist crackdowns. This downfall drives home 2 key lessons. First, true courage means confronting evil head-on, even when it costs everything. Pilecki's sacrifice shows grit wins, battles the world ignores. Second, bearing harsh truths can isolate you. Denial protects the comfortable, but persistence cracks it eventually. From hero to martyr, his story's a cautionary tale on ethical boundaries. Defy tyranny, but know the personal toll. But even in defeat, his impact echoes. In 2026, with whistleblowers facing backlash worldwide, Pilecki's legacy inspires, proving one voice can rewrite history's darkest chapters. But even in that tragic defeat, Pilecki's legacy burns brighter than ever, rewriting the narrative of forgotten heroes. Decades after his execution, the Iron Curtain fell and the truth emerged. In 1989, with Poland's communist regime crumbling, his report, long buried in archives, saw the light. Historians hailed it as the first comprehensive eyewitness account of the Holocaust, predating even the Nuremberg trial's evidence. Books like The Auschwitz Volunteer by Pilecki himself, published posthumously in 2000, sold thousands, turning his story into a global symbol. Films and documentaries followed. The 2015 Polish movie Pilecki captured his grit, while U.S. audiences connected through parallels in shows like Band of Brothers. In 2006, Poland awarded him the Order of the White Eagle, their highest honor, posthumously, of course. Statues stand in Warsaw and Krakow. Schools teach his name. Even the Vatican considered him for sainthood in 2019, recognizing his Catholic faith amid the abyss. Stats underscore the impact. His intel, though ignored at first, influenced post-war trials, helping convict 23 Auschwitz staff at the 1947 Krakow trials. Today in 2026, with rising authoritarianism and misinformation wars, Pilecki's tale resonates. Think Edward Snowden or modern journalists exposing atrocities in Ukraine, whistleblowers facing exile or worse. His life proves one person's defiance can spark change, even if recognition comes late. Core lessons shine through. Resilience forges legends. Face adversity head-on, adapt, and persist. Ethical witnessing demands sacrifice. Truth-tellers often stand alone, but their words endure. Finally, humility and heroism. Pilecki never sought glory, teaching us to act for the greater good, not applause. From voluntary prisoner to eternal icon, Witold Pilecki embodies the human spirit's unbreakable core. His story isn't just history, it's a blueprint for standing against evil in our own times. Whether battling personal demons or societal wrongs, channel that courage. It's a wake-up call. In a world quick to forget, remember the unsung warriors who light the way. If this tale of insane bravery hooked you, hit that like button. It helps spread these stories. Drop a comment below. What blew your mind most? And subscribe for more deep dives into real-life legends. No bells needed, just hit the button and never miss an episode. What's next? Tell me in the comments, which story or historical figure do you want us to uncover in the upcoming video? Let's keep the conversation going.